Appreciate, how many people were here for Luther last week?
Oh, yeah.
Everybody? You missed it. Okay, well, we're gonna do a little review this morning. Jessica did a great job with Luther, and I went back to some of the notes when I taught this, and one of the ways I try to get kids to remember Luther, does everybody know what this is?
Here's the church, here's the steeple, open the doors and see all the people.
See, just those hand motions, you just remembered all that. So, see how much of this brings back, if you remember Luther was going to be a lawyer, but on his way to law school, there was a thunderstorm. And if you just think of crashing lightning and your life is at risk, he turned to Christ, and then he decided to become a priest, and then we know about his theological conversion, starting with the 95 Thesis on the wall, and the Pope sent, actually 3 times, they sent him to recant. They were Cajetan, Miltitz, and Eck, all people he debated. And he said no, and so there was a papal bull that excommunicated him, and probably what saved his life, he was kidnapped from that diet of worms to go to Wartburg and be protected. And so what I tried to do was do a little hand motions and see if I can recreate it. But see, that's an L, right? So lawyer, Luther for L, Luther, lawyer, thunderstorm, priest, Bible, conversion, indulgences, cease. 95 Thesis, a Pope sends 3, Cajetan, Miltitz, Eck, they plead. Luther says no, a bull he receives. Let's see if I get the last one. A diet of worms to an emperor to see. He's kidnapped to Wartburg to do as he please. So that was it. So we had the kids try to remember that, and so Luther, lawyer, thunderstorm, priest, and get them to go that. So that was.
Was that their final?
That was our, yeah, not quite. That's when class was really boring and you had to kind of liven it up. So now you know everything about Luther, right? I was caught up on last week. But now we're going to talk about something else. And I just think you tell me what you think in a minute here. Actually, I'm going to have you, I don't know, if you want to combine this maybe with the table there? Or people fill in. Let's just see what happens here. We'll see what happens. But anyways, I think it's interesting. I taught church history in high school, the high school level. I'm a history major, I love it. So I told them, I said, I know we have a lot of enthusiastic people for this history section this semester. Jessica did her thesis on Luther. She was great last week. We got professors, teachers, students that love to talk about church history. So they filled in all the weeks, and I said, I'll be the sub. If you need help, get stuck, somebody doesn't show up. Every week is full except one. Who? Calvin. Now, I don't know if that means anything to you, or you want to take that to mean anything, or there's an interpretation of that, but he's not a warm and fuzzy, oh boy, I get to talk about Calvin. And I don't have any hand motions for Calvin. He didn't have a very exciting, conversion. We don't even know about his conversion, actually. It just happened within these 3 years. That's about what we know. And there's only a couple references in his writings even about the concept of his conversion. So anyways, I get Luther, I get Calvin. So I just was going to have you to talk to somebody. Tell your partner the first thing. Maybe you could sit with Gene just for fun, just to get started. But when I announce Calvin, we're going to study Calvin. Give me the first couple words that come to your mind, concept, thought. Just what comes to your mind if you say Calvin, and don't say Hobbes.
Geneva's tulip.
Well, no. Talk to your person at the table. I just want to get a little.
Music, theology, it's like all that kind of stuff. It was hymn published in Geneva in 15-something.
Welcome.
As part of, I don't know a lot about Calvin or Calvinism, but as I see it kind of as a more restricted.
Well, you sit at a table where somebody else is, so you can have somebody to talk to.
To faith.
Have them sit at a table with someone so you can talk to them.
It was their we're talking about what comes to mind. Psalter, which is a book just of hymns that are songs.
Okay.
And that was it.
Let me hear some of the things that came up at your table. What are some of the concepts and words you came up with? Tulip. We're going to talk about tulip today. Spring flowers, okay? What else? What came up at your table about Calvin?
We don't know too much about Calvin, but I remember learning a little bit about Calvinism and Arminianism in class.
Calvinism and Arminianism, the two classic great strains of Protestant theology that we'll talk about, okay? What else came up?
Okay, so this was fun because this tells who we are to the core.
Uh-huh.
I said Genevan Psalter, and he said
Predestination.
Yeah, yeah.
musician, he's a theologian.
The theologian, his predestination or tulip, we'll talk about that. And they're talking about his Psalter and his influence, and we're going to talk about his influence on worship.
Right.
Okay, in contrast to the Luther's influence on worship. So very, very interesting. But anyways, very diverse opinions. Again, depending on your own theology, sometimes it could be very positive, could be very negative. But we're going to talk about him a little bit. I'm going to give you kind of the dry bones of his biography. And then when we get to his reforms, we'll talk a little bit more. He's born in France in 1509. So he was, I think, 12 years old when Luther published his thesis and stuff. So he's a little bit behind. You know, Luther was the forerunner of the Reformation. He was the guy. And so if there was Protestant Reformation, it was Lutheran. But real quickly after it, once you broke away from the church, people said, okay, what are we going to do? And Calvin provided, well, here's what you do. And we're going to talk about how, you know, Luther's division from the church is a little bit different than Calvin's division from the church, although they both led largely the two movements in Europe that followed after the Reformation. He was a precocious child. We talked before you came in that he must have had good penmanship because he was hired at 12 as a clerk for the bishop. Think of your 12-year-olds or a 12-year-old you know, that's pretty good. I was saying that I had read a book about the common school, you know, through its first 100 years, was very prescribed, and penmanship was a huge, you know, because there was no copy machines, it was still the scribe kind of era. And my sister Sharon, a little older than I, has this beautiful cursive. And me, I gave up on cursive long ago. It's all print now.
We used to have penmanship grades on our report cards.
Yes, yeah. Any penmanship grades now? No, it's computer use, you know, technology use. So anyways, but he was also old enough, you know, to be responsible. So he was kind of a prodigy. That tells you a little bit about his mind. You're going to find out about that later, why he was so brilliant and all the writings he did. And he also got a patron. Back then, that's kind of how you got ahead. Somebody got so excited about you, a patron would pay for now if your parents weren't rich, you could still get a patron. Because a patron, sometimes maybe their kid's handwriting wasn't so good. And they knew their kid was never going to amount to much. So they'd find another kid to say, I'm going to be your patron, so when you're rich and famous and successful, you know, I'm kind of the surrogate parent, I'm your patron, I'll get some of that feedback back. So this is kind of how the economics of the time work. So he had a patron to send him off to university to study Latin and philosophy. He's a Catholic, so he's going to, you know, Catholic universities, but he's being trained in philosophy and Latin. And what is the movement going on in the world at this time? Not theological, but we talked about it last week.
Gutenberg?
No, philosophy. What? This is the age of what? Starts with an H? What? Humanism. This was the Renaissance. You know, the beginning of the Renaissance. So people were starting to say they were rediscovering the classics. They were reading Latin. They were reading Greek. They were getting back to the Roman classics, the Greek classics. So humanism was the arts were exploding, all this sort of stuff. So he was getting in on all this. He was listening to Erasmus, and the humanists were kind of expanding the whole concept of knowledge and what we should be looking at. It wasn't just this narrow, you know, theological training. We talked about throughout the Dark Ages, kind of the theologians were the only ones educated. And now they were saying, well, you know, bright kids like this who have patrons, let's expand our knowledge into writing and literature and history. So he's listening to all this stuff. And the humanists kind of basically went one of two ways here in the next 50 to 100 years. They either were religious humanists that became kind of Protestant breakoffs, or they stayed in the Catholic Church and this kind of humanist renaissance, kind of, especially you see in Italy. Italy stayed Catholic the whole time, but it had a beautiful renaissance. The Northern Europe went Protestant, and they had a beautiful Renaissance. You have the Dutch masters, and then you have the Italian masters. Those are the great artists and the stuff that was coming out. This is out of humanism, and the Catholics claim some of it, and the Protestants claim some of it, but this is how Calvin's being trained. And as he's studying this, his dad decides he didn't want him to be a priest because he could make more money being a lawyer. Sounds like Luther's parents. So he sent him off and encouraged his continued education. If you're going to be a lawyer, get as much humanistic education, get as big a degree as you can get. Think of going off to Harvard and studying everything you can. And except that by doing that, he was also had to study Greek. So now he's a Latin expert, he's a Greek expert, he's been trained by some of the best humanists in Northern Europe, in Northern France, and what was going to happen in Holland and whatnot. So he has all this knowledge, and then he becomes converted to the Reformation. That he understands Scripture, that we're saved by faith, and everything that Luther had led along to say, did you realize that it's not the works through the church, but it's your faith and it's independent. So he makes a break. He becomes a Protestant humanist. And it happened, you see, when we look at this. Did everybody get a sheet coming in, just so we can follow this? Converted to the Reformation, so sometime between 1530 and 1533, which tells you that it was not a dramatic one time like in the Luther's thunderstorm, or even Luther's coming to the fact that I'm saved by faith alone. And Luther was very dramatic in his conversion.
He was really pretty young, though.
Yeah.
20.
Yeah, think about college. Think about when do people come to Christ. We always say if you don't get them when they're young, but as a result of his studies at the university, he's studying this stuff, and he's saying, you know what? The Bible says I can study the Bible in Greek. I can study the Latin Vulgate. I can read this stuff, and the humanists are telling me to think a little bit outside the box, and he puts all that together, and he comes to a conversion as a Protestant, that I am saved by faith alone, as a young person. So, now, also you'll realize that what does he go write and do then? With all this knowledge and this new insight, he begins writing the Institutes of the Christian Religion. And how old is he then? 1536. 27, 25, 27. So the first thing he sits down to do is write, okay, I've got all this knowledge. How does this work? If it's not the Catholic Church, if it's not through confession, if it's not through the sacraments, if it's not through works, what is this religion all about? And he writes the Institutes right off the bat. And anybody here read them?
Bits and pieces.
Bits and pieces. He wrote this at 27, but by the time he died, he kept editing it, and it became twice as long by the time he died. So they keep calling it the Institutes of the book, but it's like every what is it? Addition. You've seen books that have additions and they have they add to their additions. Well, he added about 50%, or 100%, I guess. He doubled it. So by the time he died, if you buy the American version or English language version today, it's about 530 pages, often divided into many books. I had one friend, and I'll maybe talk to him about him later. When he got saved, he went to Calvin's Institutes and read the whole thing through. And he was just so excited. He was just so excited. It just thrilled his soul. And was your soul thrilled as you read excerpts? Or?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty brilliant.
Pretty brilliant, yeah. I mean, the reason that he kind of set the tone for the Protestant Reformation that was not Lutheran, what we call the Reformed, was because it was really brilliant and had all the answers. If you want to know, he could hand you a book. Luther wasn't quite like that. Luther was kind of making it up as he goes, and a little fuzzy, and you weren't quite sure. Well, I'm a Lutheran. What does that mean? Well, I think it means I'm a Calvinist. I know exactly what it means. Just read it right here in the book. So that gets it started. Now, what happened here, and how did he become leader of the Reformation? The Protestants actually became persecuted in France. France continued to be a Catholic country. So if you kind of think of your map, the German princes protected Luther, but there was nobody in France to protect the French Protestants. Now, so some moved up into the Netherlands, and we'll find out that they were safe there, but the other ones had to move down to Switzerland. And so he ran off to Switzerland. In fact, he was going to go to Strasbourg. I think that was the capital. So he's going to go to the big city and just be safe and hang out. And he was only going to stay one night in Geneva. He was just going to stay at the motel. You know, he's on his way to Strasbourg. And William Farel had heard about him, knew about him, and said, you've got to stay here in Geneva. We need you. We need the Reformation here in Geneva. You're the perfect guy. It's sort of like recruiting a pastor. You know, you have a pastoral search committee. And Farel was on the local pastoral search committee, and here comes this great guy through town. He's on his way to Strasbourg. No. Lord is calling you to Faith Covenant of Geneva. And so kind of recruited him as the pastor of Geneva. Now, your insights from last week are going to be needed here because it just doesn't make any sense. He got to Geneva and he said, okay, remember he's got his institutes. He's going to tell you how to be a Protestant, a believer in Geneva. And so he starts setting up all the rules. You remember how church and state were combined at this time? And there was always an argument about who gets to set up the rules. Either the prince gets to set up the rules or the church gets to set up the rules. And it kind of like, why did we even argue about the rules? Well, let me read some rules, okay? Any citizen, does it say church member? Any citizen is forbidden to use gold or silver in borders, embroideries, lace, braids, or threads to decorate their clothing. To wear chains, necklaces, buttons, cording, or silver. To use gold or jewelry at all. To wear any hosiery, be it high or low, made of silk. For men to wear long hair and earrings. Now, who did that apply to? Well, how many people in Geneva? The ones that went to church? Everybody. Hey, we're going to be a religious people. We're going to be a Protestant, the church, and Catholics. Everybody in the town was, you were baptized Catholic. You were a Catholic. You followed what the church said. Here you're going to be a Protestant. What are we going to do? What are the rules? So he started setting up rules. Well, you need to know how to dress. Obviously, you can't just let anybody dress the way they want, willy-nilly. So he set up rules. And of course, as the church, he decided that those were the rules. Now, who in the town has something to say about that?
Town council.
The town council. And the town council said, wait, what about us? We get to set the rules. And he said, well, this is the Bible. These are Bible rules. This is just right. This is just what the Bible teaches about not wearing fancy clothes and adorning your hair. I mean, I'm just applying the Bible. These are the rules. So you guys, the city council has nothing to say with this. The city council said, wait, these are our citizens. We invited you, So can you see what's going on here? Well, after a few years, what does the city council do? No, they send them off. They said, you're done. And, he got these council, because he was just saying, I'm just doing what the Bible says. And they said, well, no, that's not your prerogative. We're the council, we make the laws. So this is just a little microcosm of what was happening at the big megas where the kings and the bishops were fighting. Remember that big battle of the popes and the kings? Well, now this is down at the micro level. The pastor and the city council is doing the same thing that the kings and the popes were doing. Just jockeying for who. Well, you get to do the church stuff, we get to do the government stuff, and they kind of negotiated, and that's what they were doing in this little town. Well, anyways, Luther sent off, and he says, okay, they threw me out of the church, I'm not the pastor there anymore. And he goes away, and he goes to Strasbourg, where he was headed in the first place. And he ends up getting married. It doesn't sound like a very romantic. Of course, Luther's was not very romantic either, but he was, somebody picked a wife for him, but I don't think he was really attracted. He kind of dragged his feet till she lost interest. Again, we don't know the details, but that one didn't work out. But he eventually got married, and it seemed to be successful from every outside observation, although we don't have the details, the passionate the love story. But he got married in Strasbourg, and he was there 5 years. And then he was asked to return to Geneva. Can you guess why? Anybody, just take a guess. Why would they want him back? What was going on in Geneva, do you think? Without a strong leader.
Chaos.
Chaos, yeah. Well, then I'll make up the rules, well, I don't, I'm gonna do this and I'm gonna do, and the city the council lost control because they didn't have a strong religious leader to work with. Well, Calvin sort of learned his lesson, so he says, I'll come back and we'll work together. So basically, he got to stay, how many years would that be? 41 to 64, another 13, 14 years. And this time he went back and he worked with the city council. He would, go through them and say, hey, what do you think about these rules? Even in America, who remembers blue laws? How many people know what a blue law is?
Things you couldn't do.
Yeah, tell them what a blue law is.
Well, it was basically Sunday activities, I think, but you couldn't do anything on Sunday.
My parents grew up in the 30s with blue laws. They were civil, governmental, go ahead, talk about it.
The city of Zion was a theocracy till 1939, and they had blue line. You could get.
Wait, listen to this. The city of Zion in Illinois, was a theocracy up till 1939. They said God is running our city. Go ahead, talk about it.
You could get arrested for smoking if you were on a train smoking and it stopped at the station in Zion. You could get arrested for smoking on that train.
Because you were in Zion, city of God, and they were breaking their civic rules. There's no smoking in Zion. Think about that. That's 80 years ago, maybe. I mean, we're so far removed from this, it just sounds like, well, that's the Middle Ages. But a lot of this stuff carried on. And there was other blue laws. I know up in northwest Iowa, where all the Dutch Reformed people were, Sunday, what could you do?
Nothing.
Nothing.
And nothing was open. So
Yeah, could any store be open?
You did go to grocery stores.
You couldn't, the stores could not be open.
They rotated which drugstore could be open on Sunday, so that you could get your medication if they had to have it.
Yeah, Zealand,
Yep,
another Dutch Reformed town.
nothing.
My parents grew up in northwest Iowa, and you couldn't mow your lawn, no work. It was a little questionable about my mom said the brothers had to play catch in the backyard because they didn't want the neighbors to see, because that was kind of questionable. Was that work or recreation? So you didn't want anybody to see you working on Sunday. These are laws of the land, the civil laws of the land, not just the church. Go ahead.
Some of that still prevails out in the Western Isles of Scotland. Nothing is open on Sunday. You go to church, that's all you do on Sunday.
And what Scotland is reformed, the Church of Scotland comes from the Protestant Reformation. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, this might be a bit of a rabbit hole, but I'm just curious about the history. Do you guys know why places like Zion no longer were a theocracy, or why that whole thing happened? I'm just curious about that.
Well, look at does anybody want to answer that? Take a shot?
I'm not sure of this question.
How come Zion's not doing that anymore?
What happened in 1930?
I'm sure that Zion is no longer dry, I don't think.
Right, Wheaton was dry, by the way, for a long time. It was this, this is my opinion, okay? Because I'm talking about even why the common school that was invented in the 1800s worked so well for about 150 years, right through World War II, even into the 50s and 60s, because there was such a consensus. The common school was invented as an invention of the Industrial Revolution. And it was the first time in the world that everybody got an education. Think about that. In only the last 200 years, the concept of everybody being educated. Back here, who got educated? The rich people. And even in America, colonial times, who got educated? The rich people, or you kind of got yourself apprenticed, or you got a patron. I mean, all through history, education was a privilege. And you could maybe try to figure out how to get one if you had enough money, or your parents, or something like that. So Horace Mann comes along in the 1800s. We're doing Industrial Revolution. We got conveyor belts. We got starting to manufacture things. And he says, I think we could educate everybody using these same concept of the Industrial Revolution. And it's going to be cookie cutter, just right down the assembly line. And we're going to have classes. We're going to call them grades. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We're going to have requirements like penmanship, but it's really the 3 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic. And and we were gonna use the McGuffey Reader with Bible stories. And it worked because everybody was on board. First of all, they were thrilled. If you got your kids got a free education for the first time in history and you weren't rich, did you believe in the public schools? Absolutely, this is the greatest invention ever. And I know even up through the 60s, my parents went to those kind of schools. And did you listen to the teacher, by the way?
Oh, yes.
Ooh, yeah. You were online and you stayed online because I remember when I grew up, if you flunked out, that was totally acceptable socially. You weren't school material, or you were a rebel off the line. You're an imperfect product going down. You don't want to flunk because they're just going to throw you off and nobody's going to care. You weren't good enough to keep up with the line. So in fact, when I got in trouble at school, did I go home and tell my parents? No, because I got spanked twice. I got spanked at school. The teacher was the rule. I have a picture of my mother teaching in the late 30s, I think, or early 40s. And I think she has close to 40 kids in her class. 4th grade. How come that worked? Would those kids stay in line? And if they didn't, they got disciplined and whacked at home. And if they didn't, they got expelled. And that line just...
I can say that.
Pardon?
Worked.
Oh, functionally. I'm just saying,
Okay.
but the consensus...
I just wanted to
No,
throw that out there.
I know, but I want you to think about that a minute. My parents were thrilled with that process. So the degree it worked, say the customer, because I think the customer is still the parent. The customer, it's their kid. And the customers were, my parents were happy with that. It was a privilege to get an education. They would knock that into my head. Hey, if you don't want, we'll pull you out of school. That's a privilege. You got to make it work. Well, now who's the customer today, 21st century? Parents. Will the parents tolerate that at all?
No.
Absolutely not. That's why the common school, I'm sorry, I'm way off in my thing. I'm an educator. The common school doesn't work anymore. It doesn't work. You say, why did it work? Because the customers were happy. Back in the trains, as long as you got me on the train from here to there, now they won't put up with belching smoke from a locomotive. So customers won't put up with that. They won't put 40 kids in a class. They won't let you spec, what are you talking about? You got to advantage my child. You got to understand their individual uniqueness. Does this one size fit all work anymore? No. Think about buying a car. Back in Ford's day, his famous line was you could have any color you wanted, as long as it was black. And you were happy. My parents got a Model T Ford. They were thrilled. They got a car. They didn't care if it was black. That was back. I'm just trying to get you that mindset of the 30s, 40s, and 50s. But have anybody looked at new cars? Or ever even shopped for a new car? Do you know the options? It's mind-boggling. The sound system has 50 options. The heater, the car, the seat. You want the wheel to be hot. You want the seat to be cold. It's mass customization, and that's what parents want for their kids today. My kids love drama, and they're good at this, and they're good at that, and I want that custom education for every kid. And that's the problem of our school system now. It used to work because everybody got black, and parents were happy. Now everybody needs unique. So I'm just saying that's how fast things have changed, and it's accelerating. Okay, now I'm saying some of these things are just like the Middle Ages, even 80 years ago when you have a theocracy in Zion, Illinois. But what's happened is the simple answer to your question after that 5-minute getting carried away about education was the Judeo-Christian Protestant consensus. Everybody that went to that school was a Protestant. And they agreed with that. They all agreed with the blue laws. They all agreed with what the pastor's starting this year with prayer. And they all agreed with it. In fact, why do we have Catholic schools?
Because they still believe it.
No. When did they start? They started during the common school. Catholic schools are 150 years old. When Catholics came from Europe and they tried to go to a public school, it was a Protestant school. The public schools in America were Protestant schools. And the Catholics had to start their own schools or their kids would be brainwashed in all this Protestant theology. So the Catholics had to start their own schools. Anybody know what a Blaine Amendment is? It's a lot of states in this country will not support private schools. Back in the 1800s, they put these amendments in because they were Catholic. If you can't go to our Protestant schools, you don't need to. just some of this stuff just blows your mind because it's just the opposite of what you're thinking. And now it's totally the reverse. Now these poor private schools want support, and these amendments to keep the Catholics out are now keeping the Protestants out. So anyways, it's just ironic. Go ahead.
Make a Reformation comparison with Zion. Zion was founded by John Alexander Dowie. He was one of the first laid out. And he was replaced after he died by Bolivar. And they discovered that Bolivar was a little bit creative with some of his bookkeeping. So you've got a little bit, because Zion owned the Zion Industries, the hotel, the lakes, the cookie factory, the lumber yard. Your tithe was taken out of your paycheck. So you've got the little problem of greed coming in. Well, this money's here, I can use what I want, which is a little bit what we're seeing, what the Reformation was against. Hey, these guys are taking our money and living high off of it.
Building churches and their empires, right?
Yeah.
So, but the simple answer, I think we had in some country, if you have a consensus, as long as everybody agrees, you can do a lot of interesting things. But once there's a diversity and you have to make everybody happy and accommodate everybody, then you can't have blue laws if you worship on Saturday, Seventh-day Adventists, or Jews who have Saturdays that work. I mean, all of a sudden, well, okay, we're going to have Jews and Seventh-day so we can't have blue laws. And we're going to do this and this, well, we can't do. So it is the plurality of our society, and that's really what you're seeing. How do we accommodate languages? How do we accommodate just the plurality? Whereas America mostly kind of had a, Protestant, Judeo-Christian ethic that people would agree to. I want my kids to be honest. I want my kids to be hardworking, kind of that Protestant work ethic. But there was a consensus when my parents grew up. It started to go away with the boomers, and now we just have this diversity that we're trying to, and we're making it up. We've never been here before. How do we accommodate everybody's desires when they start stepping on each other? And that's the kind of thing we have today. I don't want to, that's kind of off of Calvin, but I just want you to know that how interesting that is. That it's not just like that was crazy stuff. And many countries still have that kind of consensus. Very easy because everybody's Muslim or everybody's Hindu, and these are the rules. And why wouldn't we live that way? So anyways, this is what's going on in Europe. Real quickly to finish up, he preached 2,000 times, wrote commentaries and polemics. Again, just to let you know how his mind worked. He had a 200 sermon series on Deuteronomy. How would you feel about Nate saying that he's going to launch 200, that'd be 4 years on Deuteronomy? But he was prolific, and so we have a lot of his commentaries, we have a lot of his writings. So he provided a lot of rich resources for the Reformation. The one short episode that everybody wants to bring up is Servetus. Who's heard that? Anybody know the story of Servetus? You've heard that? And they just it's brought up by his critics to say he wasn't such a good guy. We all criticize the Catholic Church for the Inquisition and burning people, and how bad that was. We all can agree. Even the Catholic Church says that was bad. It was off-center. Well, Calvin wasn't so good because Servetus got burned in Geneva. And so, but there's a lot of scholarship that tries to argue about it. But again, it talks about how difficult and how, other things were going on at the side. Servetus was a condemned heretic by the Catholic Church. So he was on the run. He was convicted by the Catholic Church and convicted to a slow burning death. So would you want to hang around a Catholic country if that was your... So he was on the lam. He gets to Geneva and he gets discovered. He's a fugitive. And of course they said, okay, now what do we do with this heretic here? The civil government, back to religious and civil, the civil government took charge. This is a governmental matter, not the church. Well, you'd think heresy would be a church matter, but remember, this is how combined it was. So the civil government had a trial. They agreed he was a heretic. And he wasn't a heretic because he was not Catholic and Protestant. He was a heretic because he had some issues with the Trinity and just some basic heresy. So everybody agreed he was a heretic. So the civil council condemned him to death by burning, but I think it was a fast burning, so that was supposed to be the concession. I mean, it's hard for me to understand that this is And the people who really want to protect Calvin, whether this is true or not, there's some evidence that he may have appealed for beheading. You know, because that would be, you know. So anyways, but it's just it's a blight. It just shows you the Protestants didn't have everything worked out either. And they were still influenced by the Catholic Church. They're still influenced by heresy deserving death. And even there, it was a battle between the civil and the religious. But that is the example. It's kind of the black mark on Calvin's.
What happened to the guy?
He was burned.
Oh.
He was burned by the civil government. And so people want to say, you know, he tried to have this wonderful city where he had rules and everybody worshiped God and they all loved and everybody was happy, but we all know we're all humans and that doesn't work. And when they were faced with a condemned heretic, they acquiesced to the terms of the day. And you'd like to think they were more enlightened to say, no, that's not what you do. And that's Luther's legacy, just as far as it went in Geneva. Well, his teachings, his doctrine, his institutes took off, and he had lasting influence. This is what Gene was talking about. In worship, the Lutherans wanted to reform the church. In other words, if the Catholics were doing something and it wasn't wrong, you can keep doing it. Luther just wanted to reform the church. If Catholics were doing something wrong and it was wrong, change what's wrong. You don't have to change everything. Calvin said, we're starting all over. We're going to start from scratch. That Catholic Church is so off base over the last whatever they cooked up over the last 15 years. We're just going to go back to the Bible, and if it's not designated in the Bible, we're not going to do it. Now, can you see the two different churches that would arise? If you go to a Lutheran church, will you see robes? Mm-hmm. Yeah, you'll see robes and vestments and all sorts of, and a lot of liturgy. You'll see all that because Luther that wasn't wrong. You go to a Reformed, how many people have been in a Reformed church? Yeah, okay. Well, you see a lot of art and no, I mean, it's stark. And so Calvin says, well, if it doesn't say it in the Bible, why would we do it? So you have all these instruments and music and the Renaissance and stuff in your Lutheran church. In your Calvin church, you have the Psalter. Where are the hymns from the Bible? In the Psalms. So they have books, they sing the Psalms. Many very conservative Reformed, that's the music you sing, the Psalter, okay? And it's a very stark, they didn't have instruments because they couldn't find them in the Bible they kind of grew up, they started to put instruments. But it's, just think about building up from zero on the Reformed side, and then on the Lutheran side, just taking things away. Well, that's, we don't have the Eucharist, it's not the body and blood literally of Jesus, so we're going to take that out. And over here, it's totally a symbol. This is a symbol of my body and blood. So here's a symbol. And by the way, Luther ended up in the middle. Do you remember that? This was transubstantiation. This was symbol. Luther came up with consubstantiation. It wasn't literally, but it was more than a symbol. It was spiritually the body and blood of Jesus. So he came up with that kind of compromise. That was Luther. So think about the Lutheran Church changing the things that he felt were wrong, the Protestant building up things that they thought were right. Yes?
I just feel like this is a very helpful framework for me because I grew up in the Lutheran Church, and so not understanding the underlying theological things going on, to me it seemed very much like a Catholic church. Mm-hmm. Just like I had a great grandma who was Catholic and went there sometimes, and to me as a kid it seemed very much the same. I didn't understand.
And those people, many Catholics will feel very comfortable in Lutheran, and Lutheran will feel very comfortable. And I grew up thinking Lutherans were just like Catholics. Because you go into their church, and they have all these things that, we didn't have in our little Bible church. We were kind of that Protestant, you only do what, but again, those are cultural things that we grew up with. And anyways, it kind of explains. Now, by the way, it does explain our denomination a little bit. When and you're going to study this in the coming weeks, when the warm-hearted, what do we call them, pietists from Scandinavia came here, our Swedish ancestors for a church. They're up in Minnesota and they have to start a new church here. And they were trying to decide, do we reform the old Lutheran church? Do we do what Luther did? We'll just bring the Swedish Lutheran church over and clean it up and get rid of the bad stuff? Or do we start, we're in America, we start all over again like Calvin? And they couldn't agree. One group said, we're just going to reform the bad stuff and we're going to bring our church over, but it's going to be a good church. And the other group said, no, we're going to start from scratch. You know what those two denominations are?
Yes,
Go ahead.
the Evangelical Covenant Church and the Evangelical Free Church.
Yes. The Covenant Church said, that's why you'll see a lot of robes. If you go out east, especially as it went west, but a lot of liturgy in the Covenant Church, a lot of things that look like the Lutheran Church. The Free Church, who's been in a Free Church? Does it look like a Bible church or a Baptist church?
Yeah.
Yeah. What's the one indigenous church to America? The Baptist Church. Started from scratch. We're just going to do the things that, and it came out of American culture. So the Free Church is almost like a Baptist church. The Covenant Church has remnants of Lutheranism, but you know what's happened to the Covenant over time? It keeps looking more like a Baptist church. I mean, it's Americanized. But it just explains, if you walk into an East Coast Lutheran Covenant church, you could almost feel like you're in a Lutheran church. My theory is by the time you get to a Covenant church on the West Coast, it looks like a Free Church. It looks like a Baptist. And all the Free churches have none of those roots left because they started from scratch, so they didn't bring anything over. So sort of that's, if you think of the Lutheran and the Calvinist Reformations, that kind of gives you the idea of worship and theology and thoughts like that. And that's why Calvin didn't write a total theology, he was just correcting it. Calvin had to write a total theology because they were starting from scratch. Okay, we got to get to that or we're going to run out of time.
What a question. How
Please.
did they not find instruments in the Bible? You got
Yeah.
I know.
Well,
the
The symbols, they certainly can find the percussion section in there. And the harp and the stuff, but I think they're, and they had the organs pretty soon. I mean, they acquiesced, but they added things over time, but they started pretty Spartan, okay? This is just too interesting of a story. Zwingli was the one that defended, it was a symbol. Zwingli was a Calvinist, okay? And he defended that communion is a symbol, and Luther said it was more than a symbol because it wasn't maybe literally the body and blood, but it was spiritually the body and blood. And what Luther did when they went to the debate is Luther picked up the tablecloth and he wrote these words on it. And he went back and he waited for the debate, and the debate would go on. And then he'd get, whatever the debate was, he finally would say, Jesus said, "This is my body." Done. So it is his body, not mystically, spirit. And so Zwingli would explain why it's a this and a, is it? Jesus said, "This is my." So Luther was quite a dramatic. You could see why he was a leader. And so that was the debate. He carved into the word. Jesus said it, so it's true. I don't understand it. It's spiritual, mystical, but don't say it's.
Luther or Calvin?
What? I'm sorry, am I saying it wrong?
Yeah, so
Luther. Luther said, "This is my body." That's why you got to believe it. Zwingli was a Calvinist.
Okay, well, this is when
it says
we.
Oh.
Calvin's debate.
Luther.
Thank you.
I put that in to see if you'd catch it.
Oh, great. Please tell my parents I was attentive.
A students. I'm sorry, I apologize. It makes a big difference. No, Zwingli was Calvinist, and there was this famous. Calvin and Luther never met. So it was kind of Calvin's representative was going to have this big debate on the Eucharist. And Luther the Bible says it's his body. Somehow it's his body.
There was a debate on the word is, of what the word
Yeah.
is actually means
Yeah.
when Jesus says.
What is the meaning of is?
Right, and Zwingli says Jesus is meaning that to be metaphorical, and then
Yeah.
Luther says, no, he's saying like literally.
Yes,
But
exactly.
still
You did a
the
better
same.
job of explaining it than I did. But I just thought that was it kind of shows you Luther's personality, and one was very cognitive and one was just very feeling and literalism. So anyways, but let's talk about this because several people mentioned this. Late night debates in the dorm. This is just an acrostic for what Calvin's theology was. Who can tell me what these words mean?
Total depravity.
Well, you only get to give one. I want somebody else now. You've got total depravity.
That's good, because that's the only one I know.
Okay, who's got the U?
Unlimited atonement?
Unlimited.
Unmerited grace.
You got it.
Additional.
Unconditional.
Okay. Oh, the L is limited.
Unconditional
Election.
election. That's where we get anyways, who's got the L?
Oh, that's limited atonement.
Limited atonement. Okay, somebody new, give me I. Anybody want to try that one?
I don't know.
I don't know. Irresistible
Grace.
grace. And finally,
Perseverance.
perseverance of the saints. Of the saints. And that's not a football team. Okay. Just so you know what it means, you are totally depraved. There's nothing in you that will respond to God. Okay? You are dead in your sins. The Bible says you're dead in your trespasses and sins. You have nothing, you're inert. You're totally depraved. Okay? But God has unconditionally elected some. Unconditionally. It's not what you did. Remember, you're totally depraved. It's nothing you did. It's what God did. He elected some, and it's unconditional. Not based on how good you were or how bad you were. It's His mercy. Unconditional election. And His death was just for the elect. He did not shed His blood in vain. He died for the elect because they needed it, because they were totally depraved. And when He chose them, could they resist? It's irresistible grace. Those whom He elects, He saves. So you cannot resist it. His Holy Spirit will work in your life and revive you because you were picked and God died for you. And once He picked you, can you be lost? No. You have eternal. That is a 5-point Calvinist. Okay? Arminians. This was the big debate. And by the way, this was pretty much universal early on. Arminianism just started slowly to grow, and it became the two. You have Lutheranism, then you had Arminianism, then you had Calvinism. Those are kind of the three strains you can come down to this, even to this day. And the Arminians, what would they say about total depravity? I'll just run ahead because we're running out of time. They were saying that you are sick unto death. Okay? You will die in your sin. It's like a person on the deathbed. But can you still respond? Can you still take the medicine? Can you still do something? Yeah, you'll die without God's grace. But you're not dead. So think of a corpse. You're a corpse on a slab. You're dead. And only God can revive you. Here, you're deathly sick. Your sin will kill you. But you can still take the medicine. Okay? Because God's election is not unconditional. If you respond, those who believe, whosoever will, you can respond. It's conditional on your response. If you take the medicine, you can live. If you don't take this medicine, you'll die. And therefore, did God die for everyone's sins? Yeah, for the sins of the whole world. And can you resist if you say, I don't want the medicine? Yeah, I don't want the medicine, and you'll die in your sins. And to the degree you had an opinion, like I'll take the medicine, can you stop taking the medicine? Yeah. So maybe nobody can pull you out of God's hand, but you can walk out of God's hand. It's you have that chance to walk away. Reprobate. So you see, the Arminians came up with kind of a whole different, so it's kind of one or the other. But some people do, and I want to have a little fun with this. Not fun. Theology can be fun, right? Okay. My dad called himself a 4-point Calvinist. Do you know which one that he didn't like? And he just couldn't bring himself to believe? What? Limited atonement. He believed all the rest. He said, by golly, Jesus died for the whole world. And because we're totally dead, He elected us and saved us and will keep us saved forever. So he was a 4-point Calvinist. I want you at your tables to decide how many points of a Calvinist are you, if any. What do you think? Are there anything? Are you a 2-point, 4-point, 3-point, 0-point Calvinist? And any of these responsive to you, because a lot of people, even Arminians, will say, no, once you're in, God won't allow you to walk away. I mean, that's pretty, that's one that probably most people say, once you're saved, always saved. That's probably the strongest one for, But anyways, go ahead, talk to your family, talk to your tables. I want to hear a poll at the end of 5 minutes. Are you a 1 point or 5 point Calvinist or a 0? Okay, just because our time's running out, I just want to bring this to a close.
And that would be
The,
conditional election. But then on the other hand, go on.
Sally, we got to take a vote.
We're close.
Okay, you're close.
Maybe 30 seconds.
30 seconds, you got it, go.
I'm just saying.
She can't resist it.
She's irresistible.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Are you ready? Okay, here's the vote. Here's the vote, and it's loose. It's a very loose poll, but you got to raise. I'm starting with raising your hands, and nobody wants to raise their hands. So be confident. Be confident. Any 5 point Calvinists? Any 5 points? 4 point. 3 point. 3 point. Okay, we got a couple. Which 3 points?
I think, for me at least, total depravity, unconditional election, and perseverance with saints.
Yeah. Okay. Similar. 2 point. Little. 1 point. What is it?
When it comes to salvation, the total depravity.
Total depravity. Okay. I always tell the class at the end what I am. I like to try to say 2 because I want to be kind of win my Calvin friends over that I'm not just totally out. But I really probably 1.5. I want to define this as when you're dying on a deathbed, you're totally depraved. I want to claim that, so I'm kind of a half on that. And I also believe that the perseverance of the saints, nobody can pull you out of God's hand. Okay? Again, I'm fudging on that because you probably could do it yourself. But I like to say those are the 2 I'm attracted to, and I can kind of be close to my Calvinist brothers with. But anyways, it's just interesting. And I think when you're talking to people, I'll close with this. We didn't get into the Heidelberg Confession, the Westminster, but Reformed theology has these wonderful answers. And by the way, for a certain person, that is so affirming. We had a guy in this church. He struggled with his faith. We a lot of times we've used hospital as a metaphor for this church to we heal people. But what he needed was Calvinism because he wanted answers to everything. And he's the one that read Calvin's Institutes after he got saved. And you know where he is now? He's at Bethel Presbyterian Church. Because this is logical. If you're everything really falls. If you're totally depraved, kind of the rest of these kind of fall logically somewhat. And he's just a very logical person that needed answers. And this church frustrated him because we said, well, we have some people that believe this and some people believe that. And we have some people that believe this and some people that believe that. And that just drove him nuts. And now he's in a church that says, I've got an answer. And he's having a great time at his Presbyterian church. In fact, we sent several people over there that needed those kind of answers. The one's a elder in the church now. And this has brought him to faith. Okay, so I guess I want to be honoring how God works in different ways in different lives. But at least you understand now when you have those conversations. Okay, thanks so much. This was great.
Thank you.